So my role here at Pierce Conservation District is I am the Water Quality Program Manager. In that program, we kind of have two arms of the program. One is green stormwater infrastructure, which really works with private property owners to try and get the rain that falls on their property to soak into the ground as close to where that raindrop falls as possible. The other arm is our habitat improvement program, and the Meeker Creek project falls within there. The importance of the habitat improvement program in our urban spaces is that our open spaces really act like a filter and a sponge for all of the regional stormwater that is flowing into those areas. And if we don't keep those areas functioning, they don't act like a healthy sponge. And so the approach that we employ here at the Pierce Conservation District is doing habitat improvement through habitat stewardship. And so the Meeker Creek project really started with the city of Tacoma addressing several different water quality and water quantity issues. And after they did all of their construction, they approached us to be able to manage this new open space with that habitat stewardship volunteer approach to open space management. Clarks Creek is the major creek that goes through the city of Puyallup, and actually it starts up in Pierce County. And Clarks Creek is sick for several different parameters. So it does not meet state standards for temperature, dissolved oxygen, and fecal coliform. For us in a water quality as it relates to salmon, the fecal coliform does not actually affect salmon, but temperature and dissolved oxygen do. And so the city of Puyallup has essentially been mandated to have a cleanup plan to try and get those parameters back into compliance with the state standards. And so they're always looking for projects and opportunities in the larger Clarks Creek system, which includes Meeker Creek. So Meeker Creek used to be a meandering creek that would go into Clarks Creek. And back when Ezra Meeker was the farmer at the time, he wanted to farm the valley land there. And so he put in a series of ditches, trapezoidal ditches, to be able to de-water the land to be able to farm. So Meeker, what we have renamed as Creek, really, if you look at the old maps, was actually called Meeker Ditch because it does function like a ditch. And so the city of Puyallup has been finding different areas in the larger Clarks Creek system to be able to purchase up property, to be able to put those ditches back into meandering function, to be able to slow the water but add shade over the top, to be able to increase dissolved oxygen and decrease temperature. In this area of Puyallup, there was also localized flooding. And so in the process of them meandering the creek, they actually built up side slopes and dug down deeper into the ground to actually have a holding basin. So as the excess water was entering, it didn't kind of spill over the way it used to when it was just that trapezoidal ditch. And so the city of Puyallup saw this as an opportunity to purchase this old property, to be able to meander the creek, to be able to add a lot of vegetation over the top to help cool the creek, which cool water holds more oxygen, so higher dissolved oxygen, and then also have holding capacity. And it was really interesting because after we, the first winter, we went back and talked to some of the community members, and they talked about the fact that their basements that used to flood no longer flood. And then when the city was noticing like vegetative growth, they were seeing an increase of vegetative growth, lower temperatures as the vegetation was growing up, and also an increase of our wildlife being able to enjoy that space. So Pierce Conservation District has been a partner with the city of Puyallup, for a very strong partner for over 20 years. And so we've really acted as their community liaison for their habitat projects. And so you might have heard of Silver Creek in the Clarks Creek Basin. That's a creek that the city of Puyallup purchased this property that was old farmland. Silver Creek used to actually be in a ditch under the ground and was pumped into Meeker Creek as just a pipe into Meeker Creek. They purchased that about 20 years ago. They daylighted that creek. It is now surface water. And they approached us and asked us if we would help with the replanting and some of the maintenance for ongoing establishment of those plants. And we said yes, it aligned with our practices. that 20 years ago spurred into a long growing relationship that now has turned into the Green Puyallup Partnership, which is a partnership between the City of Puyallup and the Conservation District, where the City of Puyallup has over 300 acres across all of the city. And they have asked us to manage those acres with crew time and with volunteer support. And so when Meeker Creek wasn't even a property or the Meeker Creek Restoration Site, I should say, was not even a property that the City of Puyallup owned, they asked us if we brought this on, if we did this project, is it something that you could take on in management, into establishment, and thereon beyond? And we looked at what we wanted to do, and we said, yes, absolutely. So we were one of the stakeholders that had to say yes for them to even purchase the property. Then the city, with their engineers, they hired contractors to engineer the project and to build the project. And I was just kind of along to be able to provide some input, but just follow along with that process. I'm not an engineer. There's no engineers on staff. We're really looking at, after it's built, how do we reestablish the habitat and make sure that that habitat is functioning. And so as the project was coming to an end, I was able to secure a $45,000 grant to help bring in some plant material and some crew time to assist. We put in over 10,000 live stakes along the bottom of the newly established floodplain. That was really difficult, so we had a crew do that. And then we did between 5,000 and 6,000 containerized plants along either side of Meeker Creek, and all of those plants got installed with volunteers over that first fall. And we at the Conservation District led all of those restoration efforts. Through that process, we got a lot of community interest, and so we were able to establish a habitat stewardship group that were working out there monthly through the establishment period. Now it's pretty much established and it does not need monthly maintenance. And there is a neighbor that actually has a nature camp, and so they use a part of Meeker Creek as part of their nature camp. And so we do still have community engagement on a regular basis with that site, but we don't need that full-blown habitat stewardship support anymore.
So you can imagine that when we've gone through such a large construction project, you've effectively scraped down the entire soil line, so it's got no vegetation on it anymore, fairly desolate. We've had to rechannel out that whole area. Soil has been shifted from point A to point B, compacted in some areas. This is now considered a disturbed zone, right? And so when we have that type of an area, one of our biggest worries is a large influx of invasive species. When we think about invasive species and native species and non-native species, I think it's best we take a step back and kind of define those terms. What does that mean in this space, right? For native species, think about plants that have adapted to specific geographic and ecosystem conditions over large swaths of time. They have existed here without our direct engagement and influence as humans. Whereas non-native, it's quite the opposite. So things that have come from different areas geographically, been introduced by humans into a space, and are now having different impacts on the ecosystem. A lot of times, depending upon their specific competitive advantages, they can become the term invasive, right? So that means that this plant is going to come through and take over a space and outcompete the native plants that we have around us. They will form what's called a monoculture. So with an invasive plant, we see issues arise that otherwise we wouldn't have. A monoculture is when a singular species, mono, starts to take over an entire area and not allow for others to exist, which reduces a handful of the ecosystem services that we really need in this critical habitat. Think blackberry, right? One of our main invasive species that comes through. It has delicious berries and it has lovely thicketing undergrowth, and it can sustain life for very specific groups of species, but that excludes 98% of the other ones, right? So if it takes over a whole place, we are reducing available habitat for most of our native species. Causes a lot of problems. It's really easy to think that when we have these larger projects where we've gone through, done a lot of construction, had an initial replanting, that we can say the restoration is done, we've done the hard work, and so we can move on to the next project and forget about this one. But it really couldn't be further from the truth. With these early stage projects, we really need to ensure that long term, in order to achieve success, that we manage the invasive populations that are trying to come in and promote the health of the native species so that they can better restore the balance within to provide those ecosystem services that we need so bad. One of the ways in which we're able to do this is through our volunteer management program of habitat stewardship. As an organization, we only have so much time, labor, and money that these types of volunteer programs are really vital to the success of the program. So we train and elevate volunteers to become habitat stewards. These stewards are able to then lead their own volunteer groups within the community to also just continue our efforts for monitoring and management, where they can remove invasive species and install native plants and ensure their success. Meeker Creek is one of these sites in which we have had two very good stewards for the better part of the last 10 years who have helped by taking a little bit of extra ownership in this space and guiding restoration planning, especially as it comes to specific zones where we're working and the types of plants that we're putting in. So this place has actually very drastically changed over the last 10 years. Where it started, being kind of a grassy farmland, as was mentioned earlier in the presentation, to where it is now, being a much healthier, diverse riparian ecosystem. There's been a lot of different stages in between. It doesn't just one day from one to the other. There's a transitionary time period. Initially, we started right along the stream bank there and tried to plant in a lot of very quick growing deciduous trees that are going to provide shade quickly. Shade is one of our key ways in which we help manage invasive populations. So plants like willows, Pacific or Sitka willows, very good for that initial rush of vegetation. Additionally, quick growing shrubs like your Douglas spirea or your twinberry honeysuckle, marvelous plants. Then as you start to think about getting a little bit further away from that stream, we want to still have distinct positive impact. And so we're continuing with that thought process. How do we provide quick shade to this area? So your alders, your quaking aspens are marvelous additions to this space. And now it's been 10 years, we're starting to think, well, how do we start adding in, especially into the drier, elevated areas, how do we start adding in evergreen shade? This is starting to now push that forest, guide its succession into a later stage where we have more of your Douglas firs and shore pines, right? Think about the standard green, evergreen kind of tree that you're seeing out there. That's what we're starting to include now that the planning has shifted. There were three types of habitat that this really focused on creating and benefiting. There is first the riparian corridor. So as we re-channeled the stream as it connects with Clark's Creek, it added in that. There is also the floodplain now attached, over 100 feet of it next to the creek, where if and when that water overflows, it's now able to infiltrate in a much larger space. And lastly, from where all of the dirt was taken for the meandering creek, we made a new hummocky upland area, which is another different type of forest ecosystem. Each of these has benefit within that space, whether it's for flora and fauna or water quality. As we added in the meanders for that riparian corridor, it reduces the speed at which the water goes straight into the Clark's Creek. So that reduces the amount of pollution entering the creek because it increases the time in which it has to filter and infiltrate. It also reduces soil sediment that is within the water column flushing into the creek, which is a really big detrimental factor when it comes to salmon migration and habitat. The last thing I wanted to mention as well is with the more dense canopy that's starting to form with the willow population, it cools the water as it goes into Clark's Creek, providing a cleaner, cooler water that goes in there to provide better salmon habitat.
So any habitat stewardship site or any open space that you have in an urban area is constantly being bombarded with threats of invasive species coming in from adjacent properties. So even after establishment, you cannot just walk away. You always need to think about it as a maintenance mode. So that is where we are with Meeker Creek. But Meeker Creek is about 10 years old now. And so while we call it established, it's not mature. And so what I would expect to see in the future for Meeker Creek is that those big evergreens that are there will continue to grow. And then, 50 years down the road, we might drive by and see 100-foot tall trees, and starting to actually have a reduction in some of the understory as more shade is being put over the site. So I just see it growing and growing, and thriving and bringing more and more wildlife into the space and diversifying that wildlife. When we first started, because everything was kind of low, we would get raptors that were on the snags, and that was really cool to see. And we would have swallows that were eating all of the insects that were kind of enjoying having that open water. We no longer have all of those swallows on site because we no longer have those insects because we don't have that open water anymore. But we start to see other bird life coming into the space. And so as it matures, it will bring in a different set of wildlife community, and that's really exciting to see. Meeker Creek was a really neat opportunity for me to really grow as a professional. So the biggest lesson learned that I took from Meeker Creek is actually a saying that I say about all new habitat sites. And I really say it's almost like you're raising a child, where you first get this new site and you have all of these new plants and everything's looking great. And you look across the landscape and you're like, this is my baby. And it looks so great. I can't wait to see it grow up. And after its first season, then you start to have the weeds coming in. Nature doesn't like a vacuum, and you get weed seeds coming in, and you're having to do all of this maintenance, and that lasts like 3 to 5 years. And I'm kind of to call that like the pimply, like adolescent stage, where they're just kind of a teenager and they're just a big challenge. But then you get past that stage and you get to young adult, where they're starting to mature and you can kind of see the bones of what they're going to be as an adult. And I really think that seeing that progression from start to finish with Meeker Creek, and it being such a large site, so being able to really see it at a landscape scale, it really gave me a good perspective going into any other restoration site, that it's going to look really good at first. And then when it starts to look bad, you don't actually say it's a fail. You actually have to just go and invest more time and effort into it to get it to the stage where it can kind of hold its own against all of those invasive threats coming in. And then you're just giving it some TLC as it becomes an adult.